Hey guys, I'm back today with another video, and today we're going to switch things up and talk a little bit more about nutrition. What I want to talk about today is the 5 ways that you're sabotaging your diet. A lot of you guys, may be trying to lose weight, maybe you're trying to even gain weight. A lot of people are trying to do something like recomp or just maybe maintain body weight after having lost a bunch of weight. And there's a few things that I have seen when it comes to losing weight, at least, that people do on a regular basis that they don't realize is kind of causing a big problem when it comes to their fat loss efforts and their ability to lose weight week after week. So I wanted to put together this video to sort of highlight those things that I've seen and just kind of bring those to your attention to see, if you're somebody who's losing weight right now, then it might be something you can be cognizant of and look out for in your own diet and in your own behaviors, and have a little bit more success that way. As far as the 5 ways you might be sabotaging your diet, let's go ahead and kick it off with number 1, which is snacking. This is something that I've even struggled with in the past. It's something that a lot of clients I have struggle with. It's something that I'm sure many people struggle with. And that's just sort of mindlessly grabbing a handful of food here, having a bite of somebody else's dish there, and all of those things really add up over time. I know for me personally, sometimes it was boredom. I would get up, I would just grab a little handful of this or that, and it was just sort of like a mindless thing where I would find myself, overeating because of the snacking that I was doing. Or maybe I'd have, a bite of my wife's lunch, and then that turned into 3 bites and 5 bites, and before I knew it, there was all this food that I wasn't really tracking and wasn't accounting for in my diet, and it was really making up actually a really big amount of calories from day to day. And that just kind of became a habit. I didn't realize I was doing it so much. I thought I was accounting for it in my macros. I thought I was accounting for it in my daily calorie intake, but it turns out that I wasn't. Because one day I decided to just hit my calories at a certain number. I wasn't going to snack. I wasn't going to do anything like that. And I started losing weight. So as it turns out, I was overeating. I was eating a lot more calories than I thought I was eating, and that was creating a big problem. So if you're somebody that's trying to lose weight, make sure you're not make sure you're not snacking all day. Make sure you're not mindlessly grabbing a little something here and there, or a little taste, or whatever, what have you, because those really do add up over time, and that could be a big reason why you're not seeing progress on the scale or in your pictures from week to week. Number 2 is having cheat days or cheat meals. Now this is kind of controversial because you might be somebody that really likes to have a cheat day or an untracked meal here and there, or an untracked day here and there. But the problem becomes that people get a little bit too overindulgent with their cheat meals or their cheat days. And what I mean by that is they end up going to extremes as far as how much they're eating, what kinds of foods they're eating, and that really actually ends up negating all of the work that they did leading up to that cheat meal or that cheat day. So this happens to a lot of people on the weekends. Weekends are really hard for people to control because they're out with friends, or they want to have a good time. They want to feel like a normal person, and so they'll say, Saturday I'm just going to go out and have an untracked meal, or Saturday is just going to be a day for me to eat whatever I want. I'll eat intuitively. But they kind of don't have the skills yet to do that, or maybe they haven't accounted for the fact that their hunger signals are so extreme, given the fact that they've been on a fat loss phase for a while, and they just kind of overdo it. It's not uncommon to see somebody eat 5, 6, 7,000 calories in a cheat day. Maybe not so much with a cheat meal, but you can still do quite a bit of damage with a cheat meal, especially if you're talking about having, like an appetizer and a main course and a dessert. Like if you're out to eat, that can really add up, pretty quickly. And so, let's say that throughout the week you had, a 3,000 calorie deficit, but now all of a sudden you had a 5,000 calorie day. Well, that just kind of washed out everything you did for the other 6 days of the week. And so now you're just basically back to square one. You haven't lost any weight. Maybe you've either maintained weight or maybe you've even gone up in weight. And that starts to create this really bad cycle as far as, cheating and not seeing results. And psychologically, that doesn't feel very good. Another aspect to this is that, with a cheat meal, if you're going really hard with that cheat meal and you're eating things that, maybe you don't normally eat, or it's been a while since you've eaten, or you're just eating a ton of volume, then you're going to get some GI distress more than likely. And what that's going to do is it's going to compromise your ability to work out now, or compromise your ability to move around throughout the day and actually get the activity that you need. So you're actually compromising yourself from two ends. One, you're taking in too many calories that day, and two, now you can't exercise, or now you can't go on that walk, or now the next day your workout sucks because you're still feeling the effects of that meal. And so you've just kind of shot yourself in both feet as opposed to just one. Number three, the third thing that I see people do a lot is start out too restrictive and too extreme with their deficit. So they'll go from eating what they normally ate, or eating how they normally ate, to a 1,500 calorie diet or a 1,000 calorie diet. Or now I'm not eating any sugar or processed foods, I'm doing Whole30 or whatever the case may be, and it's just too big of a jump for them. And so they may be able to sustain that for, say, a week, 2 weeks, maybe even a month, but eventually your willpower only stretches so far, and you only have so much willpower for everything else in your life as well. So maybe a particularly stressful week comes, or a stressful day, you've been dieting, you're just sick of the fact that you can't eat any good foods or tasty foods, and you're just like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna eat whatever I want today. And then that kind of rolls into the next day and the next day, and before you know it, it's been a couple weeks since you've been on your diet, and you've gained all the weight back that you initially had lost, and now your metabolism's kind of in worse shape than it was before. And it's just sort of this trap that people get themselves into. Then they try to diet again, and that whole process kind of starts all over. And you can see how people can end up gaining 30, 40, 50 pounds with this binge and restrict cycle because of the fact that they just are going too hard, too fast when they start their diet. This also, like I said, this leads itself to sort of binging and restricting. So you're starting to have an unhealthy relationship with food. You're starting to fear foods, and you're starting to fear being able to fit certain foods into your diet. And now you're getting these triggers where if you even have a taste of a certain food, it's like you just want to say screw it for the rest of the day. And like I said, then that just becomes a slippery slope. So that's probably something that I see that's very common. Most people don't really know how to set up their diet correctly, or how big of a deficit they need to start with. They just sort of go with maybe a diet that they've seen in a magazine, or that their friend did and had success with, and it just isn't quite right for them. Number 4 is eating the wrong foods. So this is another kind of controversial thing. So like, are there quote unquote good foods and bad foods? Are there quote unquote quote right foods and wrong foods? And what I mean by wrong foods is kind of what you would think. I mean, if you're going to be eating a lot of fun foods, a lot of calorie dense foods, those aren't going to be as filling compared to if you're eating more, vitamin rich whole foods, like your vegetables and your whole food carbohydrate sources and your proteins and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it's going to leave you a little bit less satisfied compared to eating those whole foods. So if you decide to have a protein shake, it's going to be a little bit less filling than eating some chicken breast or some eggs or something like that. On the same token, if you decide to have a Pop-Tart or a cookie, that's going to be a lot less filling for most people than having a sweet potato or having some vegetables or some combination thereof. And so what happens is people start to feel hungrier than they need to be because they're eating a lot of these fun foods. They're trying to fit a lot of these fun foods into their diet, or maybe too many fun foods into their diet. and they're sort of paying for it in terms of hunger. And so this kind of feeds back into that whole extreme nature where you're feeling super hungry, your willpower's down, and eventually you kind of break down and maybe have a whole blowout cheat day. And that kind of just, like I said, you want to stay away from these sort of triggers and slippery slopes as much as possible and have something that's a little bit more sustainable. And so, yes, having fun foods is a way to make your diet more sustainable, but you don't want to overdo it either. You want to make sure that you're having good nutrient dense whole sources of foods that are going to fill you up, satiate you more, and make it a little bit easier for you to tolerate a deficit. Another quick note on that is if you are eating nothing but fun foods or eating, nothing but calorie dense foods that don't have a lot of micronutrients in them, eventually that is going to cause a little bit of a problem when it comes to fat loss. Vitamin B1 and vitamin B2, vitamin B1 being the carb burner that within the Krebs cycle helps us to basically integrate carbohydrates, burn those carbohydrates, so on and so forth. And more importantly, for fat loss, vitamin B2, that's going to be our fat burner. That's going to be what helps us to break down fat and actually utilize that for energy. If those two start to become depleted, which can happen if you're not eating enough nutrient-dense foods, then your body's going to have to steal those resources from somewhere else. Eventually, fat loss becomes less efficient. Your body can then maybe downregulate metabolism because it realizes that it doesn't have the resources necessary to even break down the fat. So there's sort of a rate limiting step in the process. And maybe that's just a theory I'm coming up with here, but there is definitely some evidence there that if you're not having the right nutrient-dense foods over time, we could start to run into some problems. Number 5 is kind of tied to number 3 a little bit in that being too impatient and making changes far too frequently in the face of what's going on the scale maybe. So people want results really quickly. I'm no different. Everybody does. But you kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you don't give the diet time to work. So by that I mean this doesn't even have to do with starting off too quickly. We already addressed that, but this has to do with, let's say you put yourself on a calorie deficit. Let's say it's 400 calories, 500 calories. That first week, you lose body weight. You lose a lot of weight because of water weight coming down, a little bit of fat as well. But then week 2, you don't see a big jump or a big drop on the scale, or maybe you actually don't see any drop on the scale. A lot of people freak out. They want to drop their calories right away. They want to get their fat loss rolling again. They feel like they're stalled already and like, what do I do? So they drop their calories. Maybe they lose a little bit more weight the next week, and then the week after that they don't lose any weight again, and then they drop their calories again. So now they've gone through two or three drops in calories because they thought that they needed to do that in order to keep losing weight, when in fact if they would have just stayed patient and maybe rode out that diet for another few weeks, they would have seen their weight come down again eventually without having to drop their calories. And so now that starts to cause some problems as far as metabolic rate is concerned, as far as metabolic adaptation is concerned, because subject 1 who dropped their calories every time they stalled versus subject 2 who kind of rode it out and waited for some changes to happen, maybe they've lost the same amount of weight after, say, 5-6 weeks. However, subject 1 is now on 1,000 calories less than where they started, whereas subject 2 is still only at that 400 or 500 calorie deficit mark. And so you could see how subject 2 is in a much better place to keep losing fat for weeks on weeks on weeks versus subject 1, who's going to stall out pretty quickly there and get to a danger zone as far as how many calories they're taking in. So one thing that I recommend for people is to not react to what's going on the scale right away. So if you see that the weight loss has stalled on the scale for, say, even a week, just give it another week. Just see how things naturally play out. You got to be patient with this process. You've probably heard before that all of this stuff with fitness is a marathon, not a sprint. So, with the exception of like a mini cut or a water cut, you're not going to see huge sweeping changes week after week. You're going to encounter times where the scale doesn't move and you plateau. And so, how you handle that is really important, is really going to affect your long term success there. If you can find a way to stay patient, if you can find a way to ride things out for another week and really give it time to work, then you end up having an easier time later down the road. You end up losing more fat, and you end up avoiding a lot of the pitfalls that people fall into, as far as getting into really low calories in order to lose fat and then having a hard time coming out of that diet because they're so hungry, kind of adding some unnecessary weight back on after the fat loss is concerned, and then having to take that off later on and getting into this sort of yo-yo dieting sort of strategy that a lot of people fall into. So that's, the 5 big things that I see people do that is sabotaging their own progress when it comes to their diet. Like I said, to recap, number 1 is snacking or having a lot of untracked bites and tastes of food. Number 2 is having cheat days or cheat meals that are just a little bit too indulgent and maybe just a little bit beyond what you're capable of reining yourself in with, and maybe not having enough experience to handle that kind of freedom with where you're at right now. Number 3 would be being too restrictive or too extreme with your dieting strategy up front, and by that I mean having too big of a calorie deficit or having too extreme of a thought process around what good and bad foods can and can't do to you. Number 4 is eating the wrong foods, and by that I mean eating too many of the indulgent foods and not leaving enough room for those filling foods, those whole nutrient dense foods that are going to keep you fuller longer and make it a little bit easier for you to diet. And then number 5 is just impatience and being a little bit too reactive to the scale and wanting to drop your calories right away when you encounter a plateau or a time when you haven't lost a weight for a period of a few days. So make sure that if you're going to be embarking on a fat loss phase, or you are currently on a fat loss phase, try to analyze yourself objectively and see if you're doing any of these 5 things. If you've kind of run into an extended plateau, or you're sort of having a really hard time with your diet, and you don't understand why everybody else has such an easy time and you're having such a hard time, it might be that you're doing one of these 5 things, and you might not even kind of realize that you're doing it. So try to maybe take a step back, look at things objectively, ask a friend to sort of help you out and kind of analyze what's going on with you and have that objective eye. Reach out to a professional, hire a coach to see if there's something that you could be doing to yourself that may be sabotaging your progress. I hope you guys found this video helpful. I know that the last few videos I've made have been a little bit more resistance training and programming focused. So I wanted to make a nutrition video for you guys, because I know a lot of you are really hungry for more information when it comes to nutrition, no pun intended. But if you like this video, give me a like, subscribe to me on YouTube, like it on Instagram, follow me on Instagram, and I'm going to keep trying to make great content for you guys, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.